Where does this race stand? Well, in recent hours, I pressed my sources to be candid. Veteran Democrats told me they remain confident. They believe the early voting surge is a sign of enthusiasm on their side. They believe Vice President Biden is steady enough. And amid a deadly pandemic, with case numbers now spiking to record levels nationwide, they argue that steady and centrist will be what wins in the suburbs. And in the states, they're trying to turn blue. But top Republicans told me not to count out President Trump, who is reviving his playbook from 2016 with rallies, grievances, and brutal attacks. They also see an uptick in GOP registration in some states, and they insist that in the final days, Trump can paint Biden as a progressive and connect with Americans who are restless and frustrated by this pandemic. Joining me tonight are three first-rate political reporters. Toluse Olorunnipa, White House reporter for The Washington Post, who is joining us from Nashville. Susan Page, Washington bureau chief for USA Today. And Asma, Khalid, political correspondent for National Public Radio and co-host of the NPR Politics podcast. Let's begin with that debate and this exchange on the pandemic.
It will go away, and as I say, we're rounding the turn, we're rounding the corner. It's going away.
220,000 Americans dead. Anyone who's responsible for that many deaths should not remain as President of the United States of America.
Toluse, you wrote in the paper today that the president's aides privately urged him to try to make up ground in this debate by avoiding constant interruptions. But inside the campaign and the White House tonight, do they believe it was enough to alter the fundamental dynamics?
No one who watched last night really saw it as a game-changing debate. They saw it as sort of the status quo. The president did better than he did in the first debate in terms of his mood and not coming across as angry, not coming across as sort of a bully. He did not interrupt as much. A lot of his aides said, allow Joe Biden to speak, allow there to be a contrast of the different ideas on the stage, and that happened. We heard from Joe Biden, we heard from President Trump, and they did have very different views and visions for where they want to take the country. Now, a lot of the things the president said when it came to the coronavirus pandemic left him on the defensive. He was saying, we're rounding the turn, everything is going to be okay, everything's going to be fine, and 24 hours later, we hit a new record, more than 80,000 cases in the United States, just over 24 hours. So it's clear that the president is really on his heels when it comes to the coronavirus pandemic. He wants it to be in the rearview mirror, but as we're getting closer to Election Day, it is the #1 issue on the minds of lots of Americans, and it's not getting better. In many cases, in many parts of the country, it's getting worse.
Asma, on healthcare, it's not just about the handling of the pandemic, it's also the future of the Affordable Care Act, which now faces a reckoning in the courts. Inside the Biden campaign, do they believe his attack on the president's health care position, the administration's position on the Affordable Care Act, is breaking through with key voters?
I mean, Democrats feel extraordinarily confident on issues of health care. I've been hearing that actually for weeks, and this has been a central argument for them as they've been trying to push back against the nomination of Judge Amy Coney Barrett. I think to sort of echo Toluse there, though, really what I've been hearing from voters, I would argue for months, especially as we've seen COVID cases continue to rise in some key battleground states like Michigan and Wisconsin, is this frustration by the president's mishandling of the pandemic. I really cannot overstate that. I hung around outside of a ballot drop box in Detroit, and these are people who have personal stories. Someone who lost a cousin in the pandemic. These are not abstract problems. And this is where Democrats feel that they have an advantage. And to underscore that, a day after the debate, Joe Biden was back home in Delaware delivering a speech yet again on how he would handle the coronavirus pandemic. And this is a point that he has been trying to emphasize for months. It's a point where he, his campaign, and broadly Democrats feel they have an advantage.
Susan, what about immigration? The president's a hardliner on this issue, but he attacked Vice President Biden's record with President Obama. How is this issue going to play out in states like Arizona and across the Sun Belt?
Well, immigration, of course, the issue that animated Donald Trump's campaign from its earliest days 5 years ago. But the takeaway, I think, from the debate last night was not about concerns about the border. It was about 540 children who were taken from their parents at the border, for whom their parents cannot now be found. They're now in the care of the United States or in the care of other relatives. That is a pretty heartbreaking situation, and one that the president didn't really show empathy on. You know, it's a lot like the coronavirus, where the president has strong views, he goes on the attack, but it's Joe Biden who's expressing empathy about the situation that is actually affecting people in this country.
Tolu, what is the strategy here from President Trump? Does he actually believe he can cast Vice President Biden as a liberal in the closing days? You saw him seize on Vice President Biden's answer on transitioning out of an oil industry economy at the end of the debate. Is that what we're going to hear more of in the next few days?
Yeah, I spoke to a few campaign officials today, and they said that the president's closing argument against Joe Biden is twofold. One, they want to paint him as a creature of Washington, someone who spent, almost half a century in Washington without much accomplishments, sort of getting into the mode of Washington, following the ways of Washington. And President Trump is an outsider. He is a businessman. He's someone who, even though he's an incumbent president, he's running as the insurgent. They said that he was able to do that by his constant repetition last night of, why didn't you get it done, Joe Biden? Why didn't you do it during your 8 years as vice president? Why didn't you do it during your 6 terms in the Senate? That was something he pressed repeatedly, and the campaign expects that to continue. They also felt that Joe Biden gave them a gift by what is now sort of being seen as sort of a Biden-style gaffe, where he said he wanted to transition away from oil and gas within just a few years and move to net zero emissions. That is something that President Trump pounced on. He said that is a major thing that you're saying. You're essentially saying you're going to get rid of an entire industry, maybe even get rid of millions of jobs in places like Texas, and also tying it to fracking and natural gas in places like Pennsylvania. So the campaign wants to really highlight those comments by Joe Biden on energy, while also painting him as a creature of Washington, someone who spent 47 years in the city, and they're going to challenge his record as to whether or not he was able to get enough done during that time.